raised panel door. And we want to go ahead like we did for the case sides and select some nice stock. I would spend some time looking at the grain of the stock and considering how you're going to form the various pieces. The rails and stiles themselves are going to have a profile on the end of them. Now this is, actually this joint is drawn a little bit wrong, but on this particular piece they'll have a little fillet and with a dado inside where the raised panel goes, and this is on the inside edge of all the rails and stiles. The joinery itself, well, we'll go through the joinery in just a minute, but we're going to put this shape on there, and you can do that with a router if you want. You can do it with a molding plane, a wooden molding plane. You can do it with a rabbet plane and a shoulder plane for that matter. Any number of ways to form this. But in whether you do it with hand tools or with power tools, you don't want to be working against the grain. So as you're thinking about your joinery and selecting your stock, you want to be reading the grain and then saying, okay, well, if for example this is the front side and this is the inside edge, then more likely than not your plane is going to be running in this direction if you're right-handed, and if you have a right-handed plane, and so you want your grain to be going uphill. If you, for this piece and this orientation, if you chose a piece that had the grain running downhill, then that would be tough to machine or tough to form with hand tools. And so as you're selecting your stock, make sure to think about where this particular profile is going to be. So there you get to see it in cross-section. And here I'll try to hold this up to the screen, but here you see the grain running up this way, and I machined it or planed it in this direction. So really spend some time thinking through the grain orientation, thinking through the figure and the arrangement of the rails and stiles. One other caution before you get too far into making these raised panel doors. This is one of the more tricky areas. It's actually conceptually very easy once you understand it. But the first time we go through making these through mortise and tenon doors, it's going to seem overly complicated. So watch me go through it. I'll describe it as I'm laying it out. That's where it's going to be confusing. I think once you see the final pieces come together, you'll say, okay, that all makes sense. If you haven't built them before, watch it at least to that point so that when you go and do your own layout, you won't get screwed up. So let's begin our discussion with on the rails, top and bottom rails. The final pieces will have tenons on the end, but interestingly enough, the tenon shoulders will be at different distances from the end of the tenon. That sounds kind of strange, but it'll become clear as we proceed. So the reason for the different shoulder distances is that when we, let's assume that this piece is the stile, look at it in the cross section. When we do the joinery, the bottom shoulder of our tenon is going to mate against this edge. But we're going to cut out this bead on the top shoulder. So the top shoulder is going to extend further, or will be closer to the outside edge of our stile. So there's two different shoulder depths. And the difference in the depths is exactly this, this distance right here. Now, I didn't specify distances. I have a distance labeled in the drawing, but this is going to depend on what molding plane you have or router bit you have. If you do this with a shoulder plane, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, then you can make obviously this offset and this bead whatever dimension you want. So one of the interesting things is that when the tenon goes through the mortise here, we don't want to miter the bevel here. A lot of people I know do that, but we're actually going to cope the stile. We're going to cope this stile edge so that it basically laps over the top of the bead on the rail, and that way, if there's ever any movement of the two pieces, a gap won't open up. It's pretty easy to do, and so just realize that that's not a miter, that it's a cope. We're going to go ahead and begin the layout of the rails by measuring the width of the door opening in the case. The way I usually do this is I make the rail slightly oversized. I've probably got an extra 1/8 of an inch on each side right now. And I find a center line in my pieces, and then from the center line I will dimension the width of the opening. And I do that with both of these pieces, with the top and bottom rails clamped together. So the whole time that I'm going through the layout, I will have a clamp there so that I know that these two pieces are exact layouts or exact images or duplicates of each other. Get this like this. The next step then, once I have the outside dimensions labeled, I make sure that I'm looking at the back or the inside surface of the doors, because remember, these shoulders are at different depths, and I will lay out then, or mark, so I will, and by the way, when I'm doing the layout for these, I'm almost exclusively using a knife, with the exception of maybe the center mark that just got me started. So here I've got a crisp knife mark. Again, these would be clamped together when I lay this out, and I scribe there and I scribe there. And then I'll come back and put in a mark that's exactly the width of my vertical stiles. And so I've got a knife mark here and a knife mark here. On the back side, that's it. That's our marks. And what we're going to do then is ultimately take out this piece right here on the back. So I'll flip it this way. So that'll be my back side. So we're going to, where those X's are, we're going to cut that out. Then I'll bring the outside marks around the top and to the front. And flip the pieces over so that they're front to front. And again, clamp them. And in this particular case, I again will scribe the very outside dimension of the rails. And then I will make a mark, I'll measure in from that to be the width of my stile minus this bead. So whatever the distance from here to the outside of that bead is, that distance, I'll subtract off the width of the stile, and I'll measure that distance then in from the outside of the rail to here. And I'll do that on both sides. So these things are clamped together. I measure in that distance, take my square, put it on my little knife mark that I measured in, and scribe it. And I'll make a pretty good scribe there. I'm not going to actually scribe these again, but when we do the style layout, you'll see the technique that I use for squaring these and scribing these. The next thing that I do is have my here now I'm not using a knife marking gauge, I'm using a dual pin marking gauge, and these pins are set to be right where my rabbet for the door panel is going to be. So I'm referencing, in this case, the front edge, the front surface always, and those pins are set for that rabbet. So the next thing I'll do after I've got the faces of these pieces marked is I will come in from the front surface and I will scribe, or I scribe the dado area, or the dado area for the raised panel. And in the case on the inside edge, I've scribed the entire way, and on the back side, I really just need to scribe where that tenon's going to be, because those marks effectively will, and I'll bring this up to the camera, see if it can focus. Those scribe marks then will be my saw marks for sawing out that tenon. You want to leave this thing set, and don't touch it once you have it correctly established for your particular wooden plane or rabbet plane or router bit configuration, because you'll use it on all four pieces. So go ahead and mark both rails at this point. And just to make it clear, I usually will put little X's on here just to know where I need to saw. Notice that there's two different shoulder height